Hey, Alicia Novin here, and today I wanted to give you 5 different coding drills that you can use to practice writing code faster and better. So here we go. So why would you want to do a drill? What is a coding drill anyway? If you've ever played guitar or any kind of instrument, or played a sport, you know that drills help you practice those fundamental skills and you build this muscle memory, or a mental memory if you want to call it that, that lets you just easily recall certain things and lets you just quickly pick things up so that when you're in the thick of it, you're not fumbling or you're not struggling with those basic types of things. Especially with code, sometimes you're not at the keyboard, and sometimes you might be in an interview or you might be in a conference room and you're talking about certain concepts and you're whiteboarding together. And just having those quick things at your fingertips, it helps you get to the solution a lot faster. So these are, again, not things that you necessarily want to do in the thick of it when you're really trying to problem solve, but once in a while when you're in your groove, go ahead and try these things out, especially if you're writing practice code or sample code or just tinkering around with something just to see how to make it work. Do it the harder way and it'll help you build up that skill. So here we go with number 1. Depending on your IDE, you might call it IntelliSense or auto-completion or code completion. And whatever you call it, it's basically a shortcut. It's a way for you to write code really, really quickly, which is awesome. But it can also make you a little bit lazy, and it can make you forget certain syntactical things, which it's not so bad when you're in the thick of it and trying to problem solve and get some code out. But if you're ever in an interview, or if you need a way to communicate certain coding concepts, doing it the longhand way and expressly writing everything syntactically yourself without having to rely on that auto-completion as a crutch, it'll really help you develop that skill and build up that muscle memory. So give it a shot, maybe for a week, or when you're, again, just writing a small snippet of something, do it in something that doesn't have auto-completion on. Just give it a shot. Syntax highlighting is obviously very, very helpful at really identifying different areas of your code very quickly. You can easily spot a literal, you can easily spot your variable names and the different types, and that's really great. But if you're always relying on just that syntax highlighting, you might stop paying attention to just how you structure your code to make it readable. So if you make it all monochromatic and black and white, that'll force you to think in terms of how you're structuring things. Maybe you put in more line breaks, maybe you break up your lines, maybe you pay more attention to how many lines are in your function. Again, you're just thinking about how to make it readable in a black and white setting, which, again, not real world type of stuff that you want to do, but when you combine syntax highlighting with that structural kind of concept, it'll just make your code more readable over time. So it's a good thing to try out. Error squiggles are like spell checker for your code. And I love the spell check because it keeps me from making a bunch of typos if I'm writing an email. But it also makes me over time forget how to write certain words that are more complicated in their rules, like the I before E kind of stuff. And those error squiggles are kind of the same thing, where if you rely too much on those squiggles to identify errors for you, you're probably moving too quickly and you're not thinking line for line about the code that you're writing. You shouldn't always have to rely on that. So try turning it off for a while and just relying on your own ability to spot your errors and fix them. It's not the thing that you always want to have off, but when you do eventually turn it back on, you'll find that you're probably going to make less errors over time because you got accustomed to finding them yourself. So it's a good one to try out. Debuggers are obviously really, really helpful at understanding very complicated code, especially when you have recursive calls or nested loops or whatever it might be. And other people, will rely on things like outputs to the console or dumps to the log file, and that can be helpful as well. But one thing to try is use a pad of paper and a pen and write out how your code is executing line for line. When I've seen people take this approach, they end up with a much deeper understanding of how the code executes and where there could be potentials for bugs. It's time consuming, it's not very easy, It might even make your hand tired because we're not accustomed to writing with a pen anymore. But the point is that it'll be very, in that slowness, it'll give you that insight into things that you wouldn't get when you're moving so quickly using the convenience of a debugger. Once in a while, try writing your code in long form. Shorthanded form is really great. It condenses your code, it makes it more readable, but it also comes at the cost of being so convenient that sometimes you might forget the inner workings of how that code is going to execute. So if you write it out in long form, you'll always keep that knowledge of the execution at the forefront, and you won't forget how the shorthanded form works. So if you're doing like a null check, or if you're relying a lot on link statements, write it out in a long way. Write out an entire for each loop where you're deliberately looking at how those items in the iterator are going to be manipulated and how it's going to interact with each item in the collection. And when you're doing that in the very long formatted, methodical way, you'll always have a sense of that execution. And again, not for code that you're going to always be shipping, but just something to practice as a drill. I said it a few times, but I'm going to say it one last time. These 5 things were all drills. I'm not telling you to do it the hard way every single time, and I'm not saying that the best coders are people who always do things the hardest way possible. This is just a way to keep those skills fresh, to prepare you if you're doing an interview, or just help you out when you're in a conference room and just trying to communicate with coding concepts without being in front of a keyboard and relying on the convenience of them. I hope you liked it. I hope you found it helpful. Really interested to hear your thoughts on it. And the last thing I'll say is about increments.dev, which is a podcast I run. It's about creating space for coders to think more about their growth and their career paths. I hope you'll check it out. It's at increments.dev. It's also on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Thanks a lot.